Okay, you're good to go. I'm going to keep admitting people though.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's always with an abundance of gratitude that I get to be with you all today, even if it's through a computer screen. So I'm especially grateful for the important work that many of you and the organizations that you represent do across our community. I am DK Wesley, Assistant County Manager, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to Buncombe County's COVID-19 Relief Funding Informational Workshop. Buncombe County's mission is to promote a healthy, safe, well-educated, and thriving community with a sustainable quality of life. To that end, our county commission directed us to focus strategically on education, environment, resident well-being, and the economy. Though distinct focus areas in our strategic plan, what we know is that these areas intersect. The systems that govern them connect, impact the most vulnerable communities greatly, and that we cannot see positive outcomes in these areas without you. So it's important that we collaborate with you, invite you into the conversations, the decision-making, and share power throughout these spaces. Collaboration is one of our core values here in Buncombe County. We are blessed for the opportunity to deepen our partnerships with you through this COVID relief recovery funding. Thank you all for doing the service that you do in our community. Thank you for attending today. And thank you for considering submitting a proposal to partner with us as we work toward a strong, equitable recovery from COVID-19 and its negative economic impacts.
Right. Thank you, DK, for that welcome. Also, thank you to everyone that is sort of dialed in with us live today, but also those that will be watching the recording. I'd like to walk through just quickly our agenda for today. We'll kick off. We're going to structure this with a presentation, but what I want you to know is you're going to have plenty of opportunities to ask questions throughout today's session. The way that we would like to structure our questions is for the attendees today, please use the chat feature to enter any questions that you have along the way. At the end of our session, where we have time, we'll go through those questions and try to answer as many as we can. You know that we'll do our best to try to answer as many questions as we can, but invariably we will run out of time. And so the way we'd like to handle that, we'll take all the questions and we'll compile what we call an addendum to this RFP, since this is a formal procurement process, and we will publish the responses to those questions formally as part of the RFP. Additionally, you've heard me allude to it, but we are recording this session and we'll post it on our Buncombe County ARPA page, where we've been posting a lot of materials throughout the first round, but also this round of the local fiscal recovery funds. So with that said, before we begin, we'll pause, we'll do some introductions. My name is Tim Love. I'm our Director of Intergovernmental Relations and Economic Development, but I'm not alone today. We heard from DK Wesley, Assistant County Manager. Additionally, we'll hear from a number of folks on our team, which includes our Finance Director, Don Warren, Sarah Joss and Tyler Henry, who are grant managers for this project. Additionally, Rachel Nygaard, who many of you are familiar with, is our Strategic Partnerships Director. We've also got additional reps from our finance and budget departments, including Matt Evans, John Hudson, who is our Interim Budget Director. So these folks are going to be taking a look at the chat as you post your Q&A, so go ahead and start posting as soon as you can. They'll be filtering through and coming up with responses. That's it. I also want to make sure I thank everyone who's come together today to bring this together. A lot of staff involved. I certainly can't leave out Max Tainter and our communications team, who are allowing us to conduct this virtual session, which has become so important to the work we do. And finally, if I haven't done already, I'll thank again the attendees. We know that you have a lot going on, and putting another grant in front of you is probably not ideal, but we're hopeful about the outcomes. So we'll go ahead and get started and move to the next slide. All right, many of you have likely seen this slide before, and the reason we present it is because we want to give you some context about the full landscape of funding that was made available through the American Rescue Plan Act. And so many of you are familiar, this is $1.9 trillion that was approved by Congress and to sort of stimulate our economy coming out of the pandemic. It's hard to believe, but it's been almost a year since the first time we started talking about this. It was March 2021. In ARPA, I think everyone knows at this point has provided lots of different types of relief. And those relief are meant to impact different industries, different sectors, and those funds have been allocated to different entities to manage. For us today, what we're focused on is that number on the right that's circled, that $50.7 million that we refer to as the Buncombe County recovery funds. You also hear us refer to these as coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. This is direct aid that came to Buncombe County over 2 tranches. The first tranche we've already administered. We're talking about our second tranche today. But these are direct funds brought to Buncombe County for the purposes of recovering from the pandemic. Many of you are also probably familiar with other municipalities and jurisdictions that have received funds. For instance, the city of Asheville, I know, is considering their first round of ARPA funding now. This is separate from that. So while it may be confusing to the public, we just want to make sure you understand we're focused on the county at this point, and not those separate pots of funds that are either at the local, state, or federal level. One item that I would always want to discuss, when we receive applications and those are brought, before the county commission, we want to make sure we're best maximizing the funds that we receive. So we're always looking for pairings, interconnectivity between proposals to make sure that these funds are utilized for those projects that they're best suited for, whereas other funds at the federal or state level may be better suited for other types of projects. So we're always going to analyze that just to make sure that we're getting the best bang for our community, and just wanted to share that. On our next slide, you'll hear many different terms. This funding comes from the American Rescue Plan. You'll hear us refer to it as COVID recovery funding. And it's an important distinction because there's other forms of funding that were made available earlier in the pandemic. One example was the CARES Act, or the CRF, that many of you have likely applied for as well. What's exciting about this pot of funds is that it's much broader than that original CARES Act funding, which was exclusively related to pandemic, sort of that day-to-day, how do we get masks, how do we get vaccines out to folks? So these funds are more about how do we acknowledge the pandemic, but also sort of move on from it and recover from that pandemic. And specifically, how do we recover from the negative economic impacts of that pandemic? So because of this language, because of the Treasury guidance, we have broader latitude in terms of what can be funded. However, I will say, there are strict guidance that have been prepared by Treasury that we want to make sure we're adhering to wherever possible as we're looking at these applications. So with that said, Buncombe County will come up with a unique spending plan. We've already submitted that documentation to the Treasury, but we'll continue to revise that spending plan as we get additional ideas from the community through this RFP process. All right, so in terms of how we'll proceed, again, this is our second round of funding. In our first round over a year ago, we received $25 million. We're now in that second batch of funding, that second batch of $25 million. And the key here is to recognize that this is a very commissioner-driven process. Our commission has shown great leadership in establishing priorities for how those funds could be utilized. A lot of those priorities align with our Buncombe 2025 strategic plan that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Because it's not every day that this type of funding, this windfall funding comes in, our commissioners are trying to be really intentional and recognize the importance of the moment. And so our commissioners have stated publicly, but also through documents, that they're committed to investing funds in a way that, one, aligns to our county's strategic plan. So the Buncombe 2025 plan, which is based on public input, and we believe aligns to the community's priorities. Importantly, we want to make sure that these funds are used to support equitable outcomes for our most impacted populations. The Treasury guidance is very clear that these funds are meant to be used to offset negative economic impacts And many of those negative economic impacts are disproportionately felt in our community, and we want to make sure we tackle those head first. Additionally, we want to make sure that we're utilizing other funding sources whenever possible. So instead of just going it alone in a silo, we want to make sure we're looking at other state funds, want to make sure we're working with our partners in and outside of the county to best utilize those funds. Again, these are one-time resources, so we want to make sure we're making the best use of those, but also being cognizant that it's one-time funds. These aren't operational funds. We're not going to get $25 million every year from the federal government, and thus we need to plan accordingly. But above all, and probably most significant, COVID was such a substantial impact on our lives and continues to be today. We want to sort of rebut that and make sure that these funds have a lasting impact. And so that not only do we recover, but that we improve in our own community. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Don Warren, who's our finance director, who will start walking us through the timeline.
Thank you, Tim. Welcome, everybody. So as Tim said, I'm going to walk you through a few slides here, kind of detailing where we've been before we get to where we're going. The timeline, you can see that ARPA was signed into law in March of 2021. We worked diligently as staff to create an RFP, which went out in June. July was due back. We've had some rolling awards. Commissioners made an award in August 2021, another one in November, and then most recently in February. So now we're at the time where we need to get ready for the next tranche of funds that'll be coming in. So the RFP for the second tranche has already gone out. That went out March 1st. And the next steps will be to evaluate those RFPs and then begin the rolling awards. So we anticipate rolling awards to occur May 2022 and after that. Speaking of the awards, we have awarded $22.3 million to date. And under the major categories, public health, we've had $3.9 million, negative economic impacts, $3.1 million, our, excuse me, service for disproportionately impacted communities, $9.9 million. And then we've had premium pay of $1 million, broadband infrastructure of 4.5, and administration, which is taking care of all of the administrative part of this grant, has been $600,000. On the next slide, you can see the breakout between the internal and external awards. So we've had 20 awards for community projects totaling $14.4 million, which has been 62% of the total. County department projects, we've had $8.6 million awarded to those projects. And then to get more detail on this, go to the next slide. Go to www.buncombecounty.org/recovery funding. This gives you all the key dates, the project awards, the RFP details. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with this website and have spent quite a bit of time out there. But if you have not, please visit that site, get familiar with all of the information that's out there and where all the money is gone. We will continue to update this site as we move forward with all these ARPA fundings. And with that, I'll hand it over to Sarah, and she can walk us through the RFP process. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Don. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sarah Joss, and I'm one of the grant managers who is helping with this ARPA process for the county. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit more in detail about the RFP, the request for proposals, which is one of the reasons that we are gathered here today. So during the rest of the presentation, we're going to go over some more details and technical information about the RFP, which will hopefully help prepare you to submit a successful proposal. So on March 1st, we opened up our second RFP, and these are going to be for projects to help the community recover from and respond to COVID-19 and its negative economic impacts. So we'll take a look at the schedule for the RFP and then move on from there. So the schedule that you see on the screen can also be found in the RFP document itself. And there are a few important dates that I'd like to call out. First, the deadline for applicants to submit written questions based on any information that you would like to receive more details on from this call or beyond is going to be March 18th at 5 p.m. And we will then publish those written responses. Those will be published on our recovery funding website that Don just spoke about by March 25th at 5 p.m. And then all proposals are due on April 12th, no later than 12 o'clock noon that day. And that is a different deadline. Before it was 5 p.m. We are making it 12 o'clock this time around. So please be cognizant of that. And that deadline is very important as we will not be accepting any late proposals. So on that note, want to make sure that you are not saving your submission until the very last minute. There could be technical difficulties with the platform or your own technology, and we want to make sure that we are processing and receiving all grants by noon on the 12th. There's also not a set schedule for awards. We do plan on using a similar process as the last round of funding and making awards on a rolling basis. So the period of performance for each project will depend on the timing of the award, and per the deadlines and guidelines from Treasury for this funding, we are not able to make awards past December 31st, 2024. And all funds for this specific pot of funding have to be fully expended by the end of 2026. So for our eligibility for this RFP, proposals will be accepted from nonprofits and public organizations that actively operate in Buncombe County with service to Buncombe County. This is similar to our first round in that we are, again, looking for proposals specifically from nonprofits and public organizations, not private entities. But there is a bit of a change here in that the last round, the requirement was that your principal place of business had to be in Buncombe County. And now we are requiring that organizations actively operate in Buncombe County with service to Buncombe County. And we made this change in order to be more inclusive to organizations that are part of our community and serving our community. So one thing that hasn't changed since the last RFP round is the limit of proposals per organization. We are still keeping this at one proposal per organization for this round. Collaborative applications are still welcome and should select a lead entity for application submission and contracting purposes. Subawards are also allowed, meaning pass-through funding to subrecipients to carry out a part of the work. That is eligible. And in these cases, the lead entity would be responsible for ensuring all award criteria are met. But that lead entity will then, that will be the one award for that organization. And the limit of one submission per organization applies whether an organization is proposing its own project, proposing a project as a fiscal agent on behalf of another group, or again, proposing to serve as lead entity for a collaborative project. Buncombe County government departments are also eligible to submit proposals, and the limit one proposal per organization does not apply to Buncombe County submissions. Organizations are also eligible to submit a proposal regardless of whether they previously applied for funding or were awarded funding in the prior recovery funding RFP process. So projects that were submitted under the previous recovery funding RFP are eligible for resubmission, including projects that were not funded, as well as projects that received a partial funding award. So for this round of funding, we are looking at 10 categories that commissioners have selected as priorities for this round. And proposed projects can include programs, services, and/or capital activities and expenditures within the following categories: affordable housing, aging and older adults, business support and economic development, environment and climate, homelessness, K-12 education, infrastructure and/or broadband, mental health and substance use, North Carolina pre-K expansion, and workforce. Commissioners didn't provide specific descriptions or example projects for these categories, which does leave you some flexibility as the applicant to define how your project aligns, and we leave that up to you to determine. So now on to how you're going to submit your proposals. Those of you who submitted in our first round will be very familiar with our process. We are still using Buncombe County's online grant software for accepting these applications. And the link is on this slide that you see in front of you, buncombecounty.org/apply. It is also linked in the RFP listed on the recovery funding website that we shared with you earlier. We will use the software as we do use it as the county's regular grant program software. So many of you who have either submitted a proposal specifically for this recovery funding will be familiar with it, as well as those who have applied for additional grant funding through the county. Overall, it's pretty easy to use and helpful to both applicants and reviewers. So once you make an account, you'll be able to start an application, save your progress, and submit when you're ready. And for those of you who have already applied and submitted a prior application specifically for this funding and wish to resubmit that same proposal, previous submissions have been returned to your active requests on your dashboard, which you'll see when you log in, and your application for the RFP for coronavirus state and local recovery funds will show up as a link that you can click on for resubmission. We've sent out communications to all previous applicants with instructions on how to resubmit a previous proposal, and we're happy to follow up with anyone who would like assistance on that piece of the proposal and application part. Angeline Johnson is our grants portal guru, and she is happy to help with any troubleshooting needs, and her contact info is listed on the screen. So next I'm going to hand it over to Tyler Henry, who is another grants manager working on this funding.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Like she said, I'm Tyler Henry. I'm grants manager with the Strategic Department. And so now we're going to go over the proposal contents that you'll see in the portal. So once you're in the software, you'll find the application with fields for responses for each of the questions that you see on your screen, category, brief project description, and so on. For the category, we're asking that each proposal select only one category. We know that many projects can create results across multiple impact areas, but yet for this application, we're asking that you please select one category which you believe best fits your project. For the brief project description, this is meant to be just what it sounds like. So it's going to be a very quick and high level summary of what your project is about. Your project plan is where you get to provide more details about your proposal and how it will work. For the statement of need, using quantitative and qualitative information, we ask that you explain the need that your project is proposed to address. Under link to COVID-19, this is important in order for projects to be eligible for funds. We need to make sure you please explain the how your project will cover the link to COVID. For the population served, again, use any available quantitative or qualities information to explain who you will be serving, like demographic characteristics and so on. Under results, Buncombe County is responsible for reporting to the federal government on the performance of each funded project, and this info will help us meet that expectation. So we're asking that you describe the proposed impact of the project, list at least 3 performance measures that will be tracked and reported if possible. Under evaluation, this is the place for you to let us know about what your organization has in place in order to track and monitor the results of your project. For equity impact, in this response, please be as specific as possible. about how equity will be addressed by the project. How will your efforts help build towards a just, equitable, and sustainable COVID-19 recovery in our community? For project partners, this is where you can give info about any proposed subcontractors. And those of you that will be sharing the funding or working in a collaborative, this is a chance for you to explain that collaboration. Next slide. So for capacity, this is where we want to ensure that organizations have the needed capacity to both be able to manage the project that is being proposed, as well as manage the federal funding that comes with it. So we ask that you describe the background, experiences, and capabilities of your organization or department as it relates to the capacity for delivering the proposed project, including the details regarding any project partners or subcontractors that would be involved if it's a collaborative project. For the budget, you need to provide a detailed project budget, including all proposed project revenues and expenditures, and including explanations and methodology. The budget form is provided within the software for you to complete, and there's also a place for a budget narrative. There's quite a bit asked of applications here, and it's important that you carefully explain each piece. Finally, special considerations. This is a chance for you to provide any other information as it might assist us with assessing your application. This is an open field where you can use text or file to upload and share other information that might assist us in the selection of contracts. If or how you choose to use this field is up to you. This is a flexible field that will accept up to 2,000 characters of text and file uploads up to 10 megabytes. And with that, I will be passing over to my colleague, Rachel.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's Rachel Nygaard here. I'm going to talk us through some of the review pieces, award pieces, and then before we get to the question and answer, spend a little bit of time talking about what happens post-award. So say you've put in a project and it's selected, what does that funding agreement process? So starting with review criteria, in summary, what I'll say is that Buncombe County is looking for projects that align with the priorities, make a high impact, and have an equity focus while having a viable project plan and sensible budget that makes best use of one-time funds. Some of the specifics that we will be using to review the proposals are listed here on the screen. We're looking for a complete, well-explained, proportional, and realistic budget. You heard Tyler mention the components within that budget form that's included as part of the proposal. And it's important that it be conveyed clearly in a way that lines up between the narrative project plan and the information in the budget. We are looking for a well-defined plan that is going to help you accomplish the goals within the time frame, that projects address a critical community need and prioritize populations that have been impacted and disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. We really are looking for transformative and lasting results. And speaking of results, looking for methods that are sound for measuring those outcomes, being able to track and report that data, because as you'll hear later, that's going to be so important. Promoting equity and having authentic partnerships, as well as strong organizational capacity to manage the federal award. A proposal is required to be considered for an award. So even if there are some unknowns for your project, such as other sources of funding that are still pending, it's important to go ahead and get the proposal submitted to the best of your ability based on what you know now. Staff will follow up with applicants if any follow-up information is needed, particularly by commissioners. And if you were tuning in to the commissioner sessions while they were planning this process, they talked about how some categories might require longer planning timeframes and more follow-up might be needed for those categories. But like I said, even if you anticipate some follow-up being needed, submit the proposal to the best of your ability based on what you know now. The county commissioners, the way Tim described at the beginning of the meeting, they're actively leading this process, and it's the commissioners that will select the projects and the award amounts, as they have done so far with the COVID recovery funding. The commissioners intend to continue making the awards on a rolling basis. And then once awarded, staff will work with the awardees to establish funding agreements. Next slide. So funding agreements, all awards, whether they're internal awards to county departments or external awards to community-based organizations, all the awards will receive written funding agreements that include a period of performance, so a start and an end date for the project, specific activities that will be conducted as part of the project, performance measures that will be tracked and reported on certain timeframes on a monthly basis, actually, as well as a starting budget. We will have the flexibility as projects go to make adjustments, but as staff works to draft those funding agreements, we'll be looking to the funding proposals to what you submit as part of the RFP, and then we'll have an ability to have a contract negotiation process to hammer out the details. I also want to talk through some terms and conditions, which is on the next slide. The source of these funds is ARPA, the American Rescue Plan, specifically the section that Tim pointed us to at the beginning, which is subtitle M, Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds. It's important that we convey this technical level of information because these funds are subject to uniform guidance, the uniform guidance requirements, in addition to other terms and conditions that are specified to us as the recipient by US Treasury. So awardees will be awardees will be classified as federal subrecipients. Buncombe County is the recipient, and we will be passing funds through to subrecipients, which means that your organization, if you receive an award, will be subject to all the same terms and conditions that the county is subject to. The compliance requirements are extensive and broad-ranging. We've listed a few examples on the screen of areas that are regulated within uniform guidance to give the idea of the kinds of expectations that come along with accepting a federal award of this type. Everything from how funds are spent to how records are kept, how personnel is managed, and more. In order to effectively comply with uniform guidance, an organization needs to have quite a lot of structure, policies, and procedures in place. Our team of county staff will work with you and will provide training and orientation to awardees about complying with federal terms and conditions, which leads us to capacity building. We understand that complying with these federal terms and conditions can create a burden on organizations. And we want to encourage you to consider capacity building while you're building your project budgets. When we say capacity building, we're referring to any investment that you might make to increase organizational effectiveness. This can look different depending on the organization or the project. Here are some examples of the types of expenses that might be considered capacity building that you could build into your proposals. Training, like professional development for employees or board of directors. contracted services, such as outsourcing functions like bookkeeping or paying an outside consultant to help develop policies and procedures. Memberships, yeah, you might consider including fees associated with joining a professional association or having staff attain certifications or getting organizational accreditation. Technology can also be capacity building, such as purchasing a software to automate or streamline certain kinds of business functions. Personnel can also be capacity building. Think about administrative staff that manage the business aspects of a federal board. A quick note about administrative costs. This is a frequently asked question. You may include administrative costs as either direct costs, that is expenses that get charged directly to the grant, or as indirect costs if your organization has a prepared rate based on an approved cost allocation method. Either direct or indirect methods are fine. So we'll switch here to tips for a successful proposal. Then we'll get into the Q&A. So running through a few tips that we'd like to lift up for your consideration. You can put your proposal on the strongest footing by keeping these tips in mind. Start early and don't submit at the last minute. You've heard this. You've heard us say this more than once. It's important, and we definitely want to make you make sure that you hear that we don't want anybody to be in the position where they've got a late proposal. Some things may go wrong on the last day, and you don't want this to get in the way of getting a good project, getting considered for funding. Be mindful of character limits. This might seem detailed, but it is a common pitfall to work on the application in a separate word processing software and then come over and try to copy and paste and then find out that your answers don't fit in the space allowed. There are character limits on every question. We want you to be ambitious and realistic, to think big and creatively, and to make sure that your plan is doable, that all funds can be spent within the time frame, because that's one of those areas for us that's not up for consideration. Those are hard and fast time frames. Be clear about the link to COVID-19. You will be asked to name a harm that was caused or made worse by COVID-19 and focus your project on the population most impacted by that harm. Focus on equity. That means identifying populations in our community that have been most impacted by the pandemic and tailoring your proposal to serve those populations. Quick note about equity. Buncombe County is committed to increasing all forms of equity, including racial equity. And we will be looking for projects that can help us do that. Looking for projects where one-time funds can make a big difference. These funds are not recurring, so the types of projects that will get noticed are those that have clear one-time costs. Be specific about the quantifiable results that you will achieve. We want to see high impact projects and those with clear measurable results that can become a part of our performance reporting to the federal government. And finally, ask questions. We're going to transition to a Q&A period here in a moment. And there is also a way to submit follow-up written questions. So if you have something on your mind you're wondering about, please speak up and please reach out. And I will pass now to Matt and or John, who will kick off the Q&A.
Thank you, Rachel. My name is Matt Evans. I'm a voice you haven't heard yet. So I want to say thank you to everyone for your patience and attention during this presentation. It's now that time for the question and answer portion of our agenda. So Q&A will last for the remainder of our time together. We're going to continue using the chat feature to collect the questions. We'll do our best to respond to as many questions as we can during our time together. And then remember, there is a deadline of March 18th at 5 p.m. to submit additional questions in writing. And then by March 25th at 5 p.m., we will publish an addendum to the RFP containing responses to all questions received, including the ones from today's session. So our first question is, I'm just going to read these off. As an emergency responder, can a food bank apply for capital investments as an essential public service provider?
So I don't mind fielding that. The U.S. Treasury in the final rule specified that eligible expenses include programs or services or capital. So any of the following can be included. That was a little bit of a hiccup when we did our first round, is that we didn't have explicit we didn't have explicit permission to use funds for capital. So the short answer is yes, capital is allowable. The longer answer is to make sure that you are an eligible organization per our criteria, and that you are selecting a category that is one of the 10 that the commissioners are prioritizing.
Thank you, Rachel. So the next is, please comment on what types of projects the county is interested in funding in the for-profit arena. Thank you. If anybody wants to take that one.
We have defined an eligibility criteria for this RFP or request for proposals where only public organizations and nonprofit organizations are eligible. So private for-profits are not eligible, or public for-profit businesses are not eligible to apply for funds in this round.
So the next is a question and a comment. I would like to ask if safety communities and healthy community is important, because our community needs that we've been suffering with, having a drug dealer and he's 5 more locations around our neighborhood for 5 years. So they're asking about safety communities and healthy communities and if they're important.
The answer is yes. Buncombe County is looking to our strategic plan, which you can visit at buncombecounty.org/2025. And when we talk about resident well-being, we talk about both public health and public safety, and have lots of different partnerships with your organizations and departmental programs underway to address both. For this particular RFP, again, the important thing for an organization to do is look at the categories that commissioners have selected for this round of proposals. So public safety and public health weren't named by those terms, but if you look at these intersecting and connecting categories of homelessness, of mental health, substance use, things of that nature, I could see those themes running through.
So up next we have, please explain the nature of Buncombe County's consultation with the city of Asheville, which is awarding ARPA funds in a separate process. Many applicants will be applying to both entities. Do you advise applicants to create completely different projects to submit to city and county? And then they're also asking, could you ask for a show of hands using the hand up and Zoom tool of attendees that are planning to submit projects to both entities, and how important it may be to create different outcomes for city and county ARPA programs? And I can break that up if you'd like, Rachel.
No worries. I wonder, I don't mind responding to some of those questions. Sarah, do you want to speak to just the basic collaboration that's in place?
Absolutely. So we are in close contact with those at the city who are working with the same process with the funding that the city received, as well as city leadership. We have been in close communication and meeting regularly to discuss the different aspects of this funding, the applications, and kind of where each of our entities are at, as well as what the priorities are for our community. So that is something that is absolutely being considered and talked about. And we do want to make sure that there is quite a bit of alignment in the priorities that both the county and the city select in these awards.
So there's a question about what we advise organizations to consider, and that really is a case-by-case case-by-case decision that organizations will make whether to submit the same project to be considered for funding from both sources if eligible. Not all organizations will be in both the city of Asheville and Buncombe County, but those that are in the city could be eligible also for the county as long as it fits the priority list. And we acknowledge that there are some unknowns at this time. And the budget form, when you complete it, will have a way for you to denote if a funding source is pending versus already secured. And so that might be a way that you address it in your application. As for a show of hands, I don't know if that's useful since we have so many folks that are off camera, but I hear loud and clear the importance of that city-county collaboration. Appreciate the question.
Would someone mind speaking to projects that were submitted under the previous recovering funding RFP? Are they eligible for resubmission? And then the additional question there is, will the new focus areas receive priority funding?
I'm happy to jump on that. Yes, as we stated a couple times in today's workshop, we are accepting resubmissions from those who already submitted a proposal in the prior round. And that is for those who submitted a proposal and did not receive any kind of funding, or for those who submitted a proposal and received some sort of funding already, whether it was partial funding or full funding. You are still eligible to submit one project, and that could be a resubmission of your prior project, which should be nice and easy. I think there are just a couple updated verification pieces for your resubmission that should take no time at all. And you can easily just send it back in to us if you'd like. If you do want to send in a new proposal, you're welcome to do that as well. And the second part of that, Matt, what was the second part?
I don't mind fielding it, Sarah.
Great.
Around priority, all proposals, whether they're new or resubmitted, will have to fit into one of the 10 categories. We don't have guidance yet from commissioners about which of those categories will receive what level of investment. So there's roughly $27 million left to award. And we have 10 categories, but we don't know the proportion of funds that will be prioritized to one category versus another. That's still to be determined.
We had some commentary happening in the chat, just for transparency. From the first round of funding, were any projects in the environment climate category funded? We have put a link there for anyone to view. And then it looks like the link shows, go ahead.
I'd like to field that before you move on. And I am answering this blindly. I haven't been watching the chat. So environment climate was added as a category in this broad way. The first RFP was limited very strictly to the categories that we got from the United States Treasury as part of the interim final rule. But when we got the final rule in January, Buncombe County, as all other governments, received more flexibility from Treasury to use funds within sort of locally defined categories. And so that is when environment and climate was specifically added. The only environmental category that was in it the first time was narrow, specific to water related projects. And I don't know if we got proposals associated with that, but I don't remember any funding associated with that. Please continue, Matt.
So then to piggyback on that one, it looks like applications received today, which awards have been made to what top 5 categories? And we've been working on in the background here. So it looks like I won't go over all of them, but we can put this in the answers in the RFP. But it looks like the one that we've awarded the most to is negative economic impacts, followed by services to disproportionately impacted communities. So Oh, go ahead.
The highest category of funding, when you break it down to like a subcategory, is affordable housing. That's the category that commissioners have made the most investment to date. I'd say shortly behind that was small business related programs.
So next question. We have applied for a strategic partnership grant and tipping point grant. Those are two other granting offers that Buncombe County has for our two FY 2022 priority objectives. Since we do not know the outcome of those applications, would applying for a grant from these monies for the same projects negatively impact our outcomes of either this or the earlier applications?
Organizations are allowed to apply across multiple categories. When they're in the same annual grant, we do want organizations to pick one versus another for a project so that they're not competing in an annual grant. But it's okay to also apply to the recovery funding. We are, the way that Tim described at the beginning, looking continuously to try to match the best opportunities of funding sources to the right projects, and the recommendations from the committees that oversee those annual grant processes will be complete by the end of April. So commissioners will have those in hand and can take that information into consideration. So as staff, we can work on the back end to make sure there isn't any duplication. And if there are any questions, we won't make assumptions. We will include it as follow-up questions to the applicants.
Next question. Does the county have a rubric that will be used to decide awards?
So what we published in the request for proposals is the list of questions that each proposal question will be considered as part of the scoring, and weighting is equal.
Thank you, Rachel. Is there a suggested starting date for project proposals? Or what would the earliest date of funding be? And then they ask, is it May? And then also, is there a suggested budget request range, which I assume is speaking to budget request in dollars?
Sarah, you want to take the timing question and maybe the budget question too?
Yeah. So with timing in the second round, we are still anticipating the funds coming to Buncombe County. Hopefully in May, we will have those ready to go. With this process, as it's closing about mid-April for the RFP process, we are going to take a bit of time after that for the evaluations of the projects. And then commissioners will, as we said before, probably make rolling awards based on priorities and needs and the proposals that we receive. So with that information, we'll probably be looking at making perhaps an initial round of first awards in late May. And we are also going to be looking at the proposals and organizations awarded and what their needs are in those proposals. So the period of performance could be right away at that time of award if it's needed right then and there, but we're also working with organizations on their needs. And with that being said, there is a hard and fast deadline for projects to begin by the end of 2024. So per US Treasury guidelines and requirements, we must start all of our awarded projects by that time. And again, they have to be expended or completed by the end of 2026. So kind of depending on the project, we could be ready to roll with them in the next few months, hopefully. And then with the budget piece, we don't have a cap to budget requests. We encourage you again to take that budget piece into consideration in terms of kind of the level of needs that you have, how shovel ready it is, anticipated costs, and let us know. And in that budget form, there is a row or a field for notes, and we highly encourage you to utilize that to tell us a bit more about your anticipated costs, potential timelines, things of that nature.
Yep, use the application to communicate to us. So if it's a project that is designed to last for 1 year, 12 months long, but it's flexible when it could actually occur, let us know. Same with funding. If there are elements of the project that are scalable, meaning a larger award, you could do more of it and it would still work with a partial award, let us know. The more information that you can give during the proposal process, the easier, the more clear it is for the reviewers of the proposal, whether they are staff reviewers or the commissioners themselves, who is the ultimate audience that we're speaking to here.
Thank you both. So next comment and question. In one of the community forums, I asked if lost revenue streams due to COVID would be considered. The chairman tried to answer but could not completely address that issue. So can lost revenues which delayed contracting for administrative, I'm assuming purposes, be included? So lost revenues which delayed contracting for administrative be included?
I'll take a crack at it. And part of why it's tricky to answer is it's complicated. And this is one of the reasons we have federal government guidance and state legislative constraints that layer together here. So nonprofit organizations or public organizations that experience lost revenue could be eligible, and we need to structure the project as a delivery of some kind of service or program that is on the priority list. Let's think about revenue might be associated with covering operational expenses. Those operational expenses you could build into your budget. And we're still going to have to pick a period of performance that starts at the time of the award and goes into some period in the future. So we're going to craft it as, because of North Carolina's restrictions, a delivery of service. So look at the categories, priority categories that commissioners have selected, those 10 categories, and see where your group fits. If your project is selected, we'll work with you to come up with an award agreement that has those activities and there's performance measures that fit to that structure. And you would be able to include operational expenses. Anyone else want to attempt to clarify? I know that it's not, I know that it's a little confusing.
I think you summarized that well, Rachel.
Okay.
Thank you. So next question. Our organization is a fairly large nonprofit with several different units of work. I understand that you are asking for only one application per organization, but with different units, are there any exceptions?
The only exception is that Buncombe County is not limited to one proposal. We are asking county departments to submit proposals just like everyone, so that proposals can be equally considered, but all external organizations are limited to one proposal per organization.
So next question. As this is a one-time grant, if we are asking for support with personnel costs as capacity building support, is that a problem, as this might be ongoing, not a one-time cost?
Personnel costs are eligible, so it's not a problem. When we look at what U.S. Treasury defines as examples of things that can be funded, and many of them do have operational or personnel costs. The concern is what happens after the grant funds end. So that's something to be thinking about. Would those positions be phased out? Would those positions be covered by a different funding source at the time that this expires? So it's, we are saying both and. We're saying One-time costs are a great fit for this funding, and personnel is eligible to be included.
Where do new media onboarding and Web3 blockchain and NFTs fit? And that may be one we have to research.
I'm reading the faces of Tim and Tyler and others to see if anyone feels ready to answer that question.
I would like to hear a little more from the person who posed that, if you're willing to ask. We can look into it.
All of the questions that we answer today verbally, we're going to summarize and include in our addendum that Tim mentioned at the beginning of the call, the written addendum. We will also answer any questions that were asked today that we didn't get to. So that would be included.
Thank you both. Next question. New organizations, particularly ethnic minority-led ones, do have some of the experience guidelines which have been detailed. How can we lead these initiatives without being absorbed by a large majority-controlled entity? Or is the equity requirement less important? How will this work?
There's not a limit on how long an organization needs to have been in operation in order to be eligible. That was an intentional decision when deciding eligibility criteria. It's also a goal to include, to the extent possible, organizations that might not have experience managing federal awards. And we understand that for an organization that might be newer to either government funding in general or federal funding specifically, there may be additional needs for support. Staff is here to provide partnership and training and support to the extent that we can. And we encourage that capacity building component to be included. So an organization might want to add another person to their team or build in some other additional cost in order to feel ready to scale up to the extent to be comfortable and capable managing this award. One of the things that we are committed to is to be as flexible as we can where we can, and to let our partners know what's not flexible. This funding comes with a lot of strings attached because it's federal funding and has to follow the structures of uniform guidance. So some things, some of those compliance requirements, we just don't have the flexibility to waive them. But we try to be as careful as we can and intentional as we can about knowing the difference between where we can be flexible and where we need to be strict on compliance, and working with partners to come up with plans, hopefully self-created, self-defined plans that we're here to support to best meet all of those requirements.
Thank you, Rachel. So that ends all of the questions that have been asked in the chat. If anyone else would like to ask a question in the chat. See a hand raised?
Tim?
Thanks, Rachel. And I want to make sure I give time to others, but there were a few items that came up that I thought would be useful to hit, just to reiterate. If you're not familiar with the Buncombe Local Fiscal Recovery website, we'll put that into the chat. This is a really important tool where we've presented As an example, all the applications from the last round of ARPA RFPs are on that website. Every award that has been made is on that website, categorized based on types of funding, such as negative economic impacts, things of that nature. There is a timeline that indicates all the key dates as we move forward. You'll be able to see a list. You'll be able to see the RFP as well as any addendum. Really important website, so encourage all of you to take a look at that if you have questions about the past, but also moving forward. Another item, Rachel talked about organizations being able to apply no more than once as a lead entity. And I just wanted to stress that that is true, but also we believe that collaboration is important. So organizations should feel free to partner with other organizations to deliver on projects that meet community needs and are eligible. So feel free to partner. We're not telling you not to, just to be clear. And then my final comment would be, if you have a project that moves the needle in our community, you should apply. We've structured the application to be pretty lightweight, all things considered. So encourage all of you to apply. We cannot award funding through ARPA without an application. So that's step one. Rachel, back to you.
It looks like we might have seen some additional activity in the chat.
So we had, I would love it if someone could please speak more to the subject of equity, the different types, and which ones the county may prefer to focus on remedying.
I will begin an answer and ask Sarah if you're comfortable following up. So we look to U.S. Treasury, and you've heard me use the term final rule a couple of times. Our researchers in the back who are putting links in the chat might put a link to the U.S. Treasury website for this fund. But these recovery funds were infused with both the spirit and very specific guidance to include service to impacted populations and disproportionately impacted populations for the purpose of increasing equity. And so when we think about what that means, U.S. Treasury has named out some really specific categories for us: affordable housing, child care, education. These are areas where we understand that disparities already existed in our community between subsets of community members. And in many cases, disparities became more pronounced by the COVID-19 pandemic. So when we ask organizations to name the populations and communities that your proposed projects will serve, that's one of the reasons that we're asking. Provided a project gets awarded, one of the things our team will do, the grants managers will do, is get with you and have a conversation about defining those populations according to impacted and disproportionately impacted terminology. Sarah, can you add a little bit of information about that?
Sure. So as Rachel mentioned before, we did receive some updated guidance from U.S. Treasury in the form of the final rule. And one of the big changes with that is going from kind of this generic term of looking at this funding with an equity lens to serve disproportionately impacted communities, to having more specifics in that final rule about what impacted and disproportionately impacted communities might mean for different categories of funding. So those are things that we are currently assessing and looking at, and that we will also be looking at in the evaluation process, and commissioners will also be identifying in their process. A lot of that has to do with low-income households, which low income is being determined based on federal guidelines of poverty, as well as metrics set out by HUD. They're also looking at different federal programs that folks might be qualified for in terms of food insecurity, or other types of government subsidization programs that might qualify folks as disproportionately impacted populations for the purposes of this funding. So that's something that we are going to be looking at, and like I said, continuing to review and take into consideration. So there are several parts in the RFP, in the application itself, where it asks for data and statistics and measures or links to information. And we highly recommend you including that information in your application, which will also help with that determination on a more specific technical level.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. We had some clarification. Web3 is the next iteration of the internet. It supports new income streams as a small business can do their own funding through NFTs. Blockchain is a decentralized autonomous organization concept. Please look into this. Thanks. Thank you for that comment. Anyone want to speak to that, or I'll just move on to the next question. So next question, we are a food security organization and provide health and wellness classes to disproportionately impacted populations. It seems like food doesn't exactly fit into the categories. So I'm not sure if we're a good fit.
It's true that food security and food access were not listed as a standalone category by commissioners. So a project doing work in that space and creating outcomes for our community in that arena would also need to be supporting the community through other categories that you would see listed.
Thank you, Rachel. Don, I believe Angela answered this question in the chat, but this is good for other folks. We submitted a proposal in the last RFP process. We want to revise this proposal to submit. Can we edit the last submission and submit, or will we need to start over the submission in the form layout? Angela responded, application was put back into draft status. You will have full access to edit it. Is that true across the board for folks?
Yes, you can go back and edit your previous proposal and then resubmit it.
And our team is happy to answer direct questions from you from the technical troubleshooting perspective, jump on a call, walk you through it if that's helpful.
So I believe we have reached another end of the questions.
Very good. Tim Love, you had been our opener. I wonder if you want to provide some summary information before we close.
Yep, I'm glad to. And again, thanks to all who joined us today. You will receive a link to this recording. It'll be on our website. Please feel free to share this with other organizations that you think would find the information valuable. As someone who has been fortunate to be involved in this process since the beginning, it's incredibly rewarding. We received, almost 150 applications in the last RFP. Unfortunately, we're only able to fund a small portion, as you can imagine. But the amount of ideas and the creativity and the heart that everyone brings to these proposals, it's really important. And I don't say that lightly. So we appreciate all that you do. We hope that you'll reach out if you have questions or concerns as we move forward. But again, I would plug the website, the Buncombe ARP website, which has been posted into the chat. There you can see the RFP, you can see the upcoming deadlines, the future addenda, and any other information that you need. Rachel, is there anything else?
Just thank you to all for your time. Have a great afternoon. Bye, everybody.